Hello, it's been a while since we've been able to get together, obviously, and so we've obviously missed Wednesday night class. So I thought I would do a quick review of Ecclesiastes, of what we've studied so far, chapters 1 through 7. And then each week put out one or two videos to cover the rest of Ecclesiastes, so that when we're able to meet together again, hopefully around the first Wednesday of May, we'll be able to start something new. So Ecclesiastes, the question that the preacher is answering in this book is, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And the answer that he comes up with is, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And another way to answer that is, what gain there is not much. It has very little substance, and what substance there is does not last very long. Now, the preacher uses the phrase vanity of vanities several times in the book, but he also uses some other phrases which mean essentially the same thing. Phrases such as striving after wind. He uses the word evil. He uses the two words grievous evil, and he also calls it a great evil. And he also uses the phrase, an unhappy business. And so you will see these words and these phrases throughout the book of Ecclesiastes to talk about the gain that man gets from all of his toil. The word vanity actually means breath. And again, it is likened to a vapor that we see when we exhale on a chilly morning. You can see the vapor just for a little while. There's not a lot of substance to it, obviously, since it's a vapor, and it quickly dissipates and is gone. And so other synonyms for this word vapor is absurd or absurdity, and also the idea that it is frustrating. And again, you will see this idea throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Another common phrase that is throughout the book is the phrase under the sun. And this has often been taken to mean that the preacher is writing about events that he sees here on earth without taking God into the picture. And so, in other words, the question that the preacher is asking is, what gain does man get from all of his toil under the sun without taking into consideration God? And I find this a little difficult to believe because for several reasons. In chapter 1 and verse 13, the preacher states, it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. And in chapter 2 and verse 14, he states, this also I saw is from the hand of God. And there are also other mentions of God in this book. So it seems a little odd to me that the preacher would mention these observations and these conclusions that he has drawn from these observations that mention God, if he was looking at life and writing from a perspective which excluded God. And so the preacher mentions God, and some of the observations that he makes and some of the conclusions that he draws from these observations mentions God. And so if he is writing from a perspective without God in the picture, I don't understand why he would mention God. But that's my understanding. And so the preacher begins the book of Ecclesiastes by writing about the seeming endlessness of things. And he begins there in chapter 1, and he talks about a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. He talks about the fact that the sun rises and then it sets and hastens to the place where it rises again. The wind blows to the south and then to the north, and around the wind blows. He makes the observations that all the streams flow to the sea, but the sea does not fill up, and the streams keep flowing to the sea. And he says it's just the same thing over and over and over again, and he says that it's just all full of weariness. He makes the observation that no one remembers what and who came before us, and no one will remember us either eventually. And so he sums all of this up by saying it is an unhappy business that God has given us to be busy with. And again, there's that phrase, an unhappy business, a synonym for the idea of vanity, a synonym for the idea of what gain there is does not last long and doesn't have much substance to it. The idea that it is frustrating, the idea that it just seems absurd to him that things just keep going and going and going the same way that they've always gone. And then at the end of chapter 1, the preacher records one of his observations, and he says, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. So again, there's that phrase, striving after wind, another synonym for the idea of vanity. And so he concludes, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And again, all of us have had that experience, that the more we know, sometimes the worse off we feel. And so he realized that his wisdom and his knowledge brought him vexation and sorrow. As one person once remarked, once you've seen sausage made, you'll never eat sausage anymore. My younger sister is a nurse. She used to be an occupational nurse, and she would do inspections of plants, and she inspected a bacon processing facility. And she said when she was done, she swore she would never eat bacon again. Sometimes, when you peek behind the curtain and you see how things really are, it's very vexing and it's very frustrating. And sometimes the more you know, the more sorrow you feel. Now the lesson from that is not to remain ignorant. The lesson from that is not to not learn anything and not to pursue wisdom, as we will see later, but it is an observation that the preacher makes, that sometimes the more you know, the more sorrow you have. And the more you understand how things work, the causes and the consequences of things, the more frustrating it is to you. Then in chapter 2, the preacher turns to the idea of pleasure. And so he says, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. And then he says in verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. And so if you'll read chapter 2, you'll notice that he gets whatever he wants. He builds gardens, he plants fruit trees, he builds ponds to water the garden and the forest. He gets singers, male singers, female singers. He gets concubines, the delight of the children of man. He gets whatever he wants. And his conclusion from all of that was, my heart found pleasure in all my toil. My heart found pleasure in getting all of these things and having all of these things, and that was my reward for all my toil. And then in verse 11 he says, then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. What he got out of all of that, what he got out of getting everything that he wanted and enjoying it, was the pleasure that his heart found in doing it. And that was it. Once he got everything, once he had finished getting everything and building everything that he wanted to build, the pleasure was gone. He records another observation, in that whatever he has acquired in his life will be left behind when he dies, and who knows if the person who gets it will be a wise man or a foolish man. And as he says there in chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. And so he just thought it was absurd And it caused him vexation and frustration when he realized that one day he was going to die and leave everything that he had acquired in his life to somebody else, and he didn't know whether that person was going to be a wise individual or whether he was going to be a foolish individual. And the fact that he was going to have to leave it to somebody, and he didn't know whether it would be taken care of or wasted, was very frustrating to the preacher and just seemed absurd to him. And then at the end of chapter 2, he draws a conclusion from those observations that he had made earlier, and he says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, I saw, is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And so his conclusion was, if I'm going to leave everything to somebody else, and I don't know whether they're going to be a wise individual or a foolish individual, and if all I got out of getting everything I wanted was the enjoyment of getting it, then I think it's just better to eat and drink and enjoy your work. And he realized that came from God. The understanding that what we're going to get from pleasure is the getting of it. And the understanding that we are going to die and one day leave everything that we have acquired to somebody else, and we don't know whether they're going to be a wise man or a fool. We just need to understand that that's the way God has made it. And if we will understand that, then we'll be able to eat and drink and enjoy our work.